You missed a spot, my daughter-in-law said while I was on my hands and knees cleaning orange juice off the kitchen floor. The strange part wasn't the words. It was how naturally she said them, like I actually belonged there with a rag in my hand instead of being the woman who had once rocked her husband to sleep through childhood fevers and bad dreams. I stayed quiet. At 68, I'd learned that silence often revealed more than arguments ever could. I wiped the last sticky streak from the hardwood floor and slowly stood up, my knees aching from the pressure against the tile. Brittany barely looked at me. She was standing at the marble kitchen island in expensive workout clothes, scrolling through her phone while her coffee machine hissed softly behind her. Also, she added casually, Ethan needs cupcakes for school tomorrow, and Mia has soccer at 5. Don't forget. Don't forget. As if I ever had. I moved into my son's house 8 months earlier because Daniel called me crying one night after midnight. He sounded exhausted, defeated. Mom, he had said, his voice cracking slightly, we can't keep up anymore. The kids need stability. Brittany's overwhelmed. We need help. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed afterward, staring at the framed photograph of my late husband on the nightstand. Frank had been gone 3 years by then. The condo felt unbearably quiet after sunset. No footsteps. No television humming from another room. No one asking if I wanted tea before bed. So when Daniel asked me to move in, part of me felt needed again. Useful. Loved. I sold most of my furniture before moving. I gave my dining table to a young couple down the street. Donated half my winter coats to church drives. Packed 40 years of memories into labeled storage bins that now sat untouched in a rented unit 15 miles away. Brittany cried when I arrived that first weekend. She hugged me tightly in the driveway while Mia and Ethan wrapped themselves around my legs. You're saving us, she whispered into my shoulder. I believed her. For a little while things felt warm. Purposeful. I woke up early and packed lunches while Brittany rushed through emails upstairs. Folded tiny socks warm from the dryer. Helped Ethan practice spelling words at the kitchen table. Sat through dance recitals and soccer games with a folding chair and sunscreen in my purse. Daniel used to kiss my cheek before leaving for work. Couldn't do this without you, Mom, he'd say while grabbing his travel mug. But gratitude has a short lifespan in some people. Somewhere along the way, helping became expected. Then invisible. Then required. Slowly, my room upstairs became the kids' homework room. And Brittany suggested the basement instead. It'll be quieter for you down there, she explained with a bright smile that never quite reached her eyes. The basement smelled faintly of detergent and concrete. My bed sat 3 feet away from the washer and dryer. At night, I could hear laughter drifting down from upstairs while I folded laundry nobody thanked me for washing. I told myself families go through stressful seasons. I told myself Brittany didn't mean anything by her sharp tone or her endless lists taped to the refrigerator. Buy almond milk. Pick up dry cleaning. Scrub guest bathroom before Saturday. But standing there that morning with the damp rag still in my hand, I finally noticed something I had been avoiding for months. Nobody in that house saw me as family anymore. I wasn't Grandma Evelyn. I wasn't Mom. I was simply the woman who kept the house running while everyone else lived inside it. The basement did not feel like part of the house. It felt like the space people forgot existed until they needed somewhere to store things they no longer valued. My bed sat beside metal shelves stacked with Christmas decorations, old paint cans, and plastic bins filled with clothes the children had outgrown years ago. Every morning, I woke up to the sound of footsteps above me. Cabinet doors opening. Coffee brewing. Life happening one floor higher without me. At first, I still tried to make the basement feel comforting. I placed my late husband's framed photograph beside the bed. Folded a pale blue blanket neatly across the corner like I used to do in my condo. Bought a small lamp because the overhead light made the room feel cold and temporary. But no amount of soft lighting could hide the fact that I had been moved downstairs to make everyone else more comfortable. Brittany called it practical. The children need room to grow, she said one afternoon while reorganizing the upstairs hallway closet. I remember nodding quietly while carrying my sweaters down the stairs in a laundry basket, because nobody offered to help me. Daniel avoided looking at me that entire weekend. That hurt more than the basement itself. The strange thing about being slowly pushed aside is that it rarely happens all at once. It happens in tiny moments people think you will not notice. One evening, I came upstairs after folding 3 loads of laundry and found the family already halfway through dinner. Nobody had called me. Ethan was talking excitedly about a science project, while Brittany laughed at something on her phone. There were 4 plates at the table, not 5. Daniel looked up when he saw me standing there. "Oh," he said quickly. "I thought you already ate." I smiled and told him not to worry about it. Then I microwaved leftover macaroni and cheese and ate alone at the kitchen counter, while they finished dessert in the dining room 10 feet away. Another time, I overheard Brittany introducing me to one of the mothers from Mia's soccer team. "She stays with us and helps around the house," Brittany explained casually while adjusting her designer sunglasses. Helps around the house. Not Daniel's mother. Not the grandmother raising her children while she worked late yoga classes and brunch meetings and weekend getaways with friends. Just someone who helped. I noticed other things too. The grocery lists became more demanding. The thank yous disappeared completely. Brittany started texting me from upstairs instead of speaking to me face to face. "Can you steam my green blouse before 6? Ethan needs gluten-free snacks for school tomorrow. Please clean the upstairs bathroom before guests arrive." One message came while I was sitting in the pediatrician's office with Ethan because Brittany had forgotten his appointment. Another arrived while I was helping Mia finish a book report at the kitchen table. Sometimes I stared at the screen for several seconds before responding because I could not believe how naturally she spoke to me now. Like I was an employee she assumed would never quit. But the moment that stayed with me happened on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Mia and I were baking chocolate chip cookies while thunder rattled softly outside. She looked up at me while stirring the batter and asked in the gentlest voice, "Grandma, why do you sleep downstairs if this is your house too?" I froze with the measuring spoon still in my hand. Before I could answer, she added quietly, "Mom says the basement is where helpers stay." I smiled at her because children should never carry the weight of adult failures. But later that night, lying awake beside the humming dryer, I stared into the darkness and realized something painful. Brittany was teaching those children exactly how to see me. After that conversation with Mia, I started noticing how often the word help appeared inside that house. Brittany used it constantly, polishing it until it sounded harmless. "Can you help with breakfast? Can you help organize the pantry? Can you help clean up before my friends come over?" But help was supposed to be temporary. Shared. Appreciated. What happened inside that house was something else entirely. Every hour of my day belonged to someone else before it even began. I woke up at 5:30 each morning because Ethan refused to eat scrambled eggs unless they were shaped into little squares. Mia liked strawberries sliced a certain way for her lunchbox. Daniel needed his dress shirts ironed because Brittany said she was too busy managing the household schedule. The strange part was that Brittany no longer seemed busy at all. Most afternoons she disappeared for yoga classes, brunches, or shopping trips while I rushed between grocery stores, pediatric dentist appointments, and school pickups in my aging Honda sedan that still smelled faintly like the peppermint candies Frank used to keep in the cup holder. One Tuesday afternoon, I carried 7 grocery bags into the kitchen while rain soaked through my cardigan. Brittany barely glanced up from her laptop. "Did you remember the organic almond butter?" she asked. I set the bags down slowly because my wrists hurt from lifting them. "They were out," I answered quietly. She sighed dramatically and closed her computer halfway. "Evelyn, the children can only eat the brand I buy. You know that." The children had eaten peanut butter sandwiches their entire lives until Brittany discovered expensive grocery stores and online parenting groups. I apologized anyway. That was the part one hated most. Not the work. Not even the exhaustion. It was how quickly I had learned to apologize inside a home where I was giving everything I had. Daniel noticed less and less as time passed. Or maybe he noticed and chose silence because silence was easier than conflict. Some evenings he came home, kissed Brittany hello, patted the children on the head, and disappeared into his office without asking how my day had been. Once I stood in the doorway holding a basket of folded laundry, while he scrolled through emails at his desk. "Do you remember when you used to call me every Sunday just to ask how I was doing?" I asked softly before I could stop myself. He looked confused for a moment, almost guilty. Then his phone buzzed. "Work has been crazy lately, Mom," he said distractedly. "You know how it is." I stood there another few seconds before walking away. That night, I heard Brittany laughing downstairs while talking to one of her friends on speakerphone. Honestly, having Daniel's mom here saves us thousands, she said casually. Daycare prices are insane now. They both laughed. I froze halfway down the basement stairs with a basket of towels pressed against my chest. Plus, Brittany continued, older people need to feel useful anyway. I do not remember going to sleep that night. I only remember staring at the ceiling while the dryer hummed beside me and realizing something cold and heavy had settled inside my chest. Frank used to tell me that respect in a family could disappear slowly, like water leaking from a cracked glass. You never notice how empty things have become until one day there is nothing left at all. The next morning I packed Ethan's lunch, braided Mia's hair for school, wiped fingerprints off the refrigerator, and smiled through breakfast. Like always. But something inside me had quietly begun changing. For the first time since moving into that house, I stopped asking myself how to make everyone happier. I started asking a different question instead. What exactly was left of me after giving these people everything they wanted? The moment that changed everything happened on a Saturday afternoon during Ethan's birthday party. The house smelled like barbecue smoke, vanilla frosting, and chlorine from the backyard pool. I had been awake since dawn preparing food because Brittany wanted everything perfect. I chopped vegetables, marinated chicken, inflated balloons, cleaned fingerprints off windows, and baked 24 cupcakes with blue icing because Ethan was obsessed with dinosaurs that month. By 2 o'clock, the backyard was crowded with neighbors, parents from school, and children running through sprinklers screaming with laughter. Brittany floated through the party in a white sundress holding sparkling water like she had spent the day relaxing at a resort instead of watching me work myself into exhaustion. I stayed mostly inside near the kitchen island, refilling trays and wiping counters while everyone else enjoyed the celebration. A few people thanked me politely when they passed through. Most barely noticed me at all. Around sunset, Daniel carried the birthday cake outside while everyone gathered near the patio. I stood near the sliding glass door watching Ethan grin beside the candles. For a second, seeing my grandson so happy softened something inside me. Then Brittany turned toward me with the same bright smile she used whenever she wanted to disguise cruelty as politeness. "Oh, Evelyn," she called loudly enough for several guests to hear. "Can you take the paper plates inside before we do family pictures?" I looked down at the stack of plates in my hands, then at the patio where everyone was gathering together. "I can help after the photo," I said quietly. Brittany laughed softly like I had said something silly. "It is just immediate family for this one." Immediate family. The words landed harder than I expected. Daniel shifted uncomfortably beside her but said nothing. Not one word. Stood there holding greasy paper plates while my son wrapped his arm around his wife and children for the photograph. Mia glanced back at me with confusion in her eyes before the camera flashed. I remember noticing tiny details in that moment. The citronella candles flickering beside the pool. The sound of ice clinking inside someone's glass. The sunset reflecting gold against the kitchen windows I had spent all morning cleaning. Strange what the mind holds onto when the heart breaks quietly. After the guests left, I stayed behind cleaning long after everyone went upstairs. Half-empty soda cans, crushed napkins, melted ice cream dripping onto the patio stones. Daniel finally came downstairs close to 10 o'clock while I was loading the dishwasher. "Mom," he said carefully, "Brittany did not mean anything by earlier." I kept my eyes on the sink. "By what?" I asked. He sighed softly. "You know, the photo thing." I dried my hands slowly with a dish towel before looking at him. "Do you remember the camping trip when you were 12 and it rained all weekend?" He blinked, confused by the question. "What?" "You were sick the entire drive home. I sat in the back seat holding a bucket because you were afraid to make a mess in Dad's truck." Daniel stared at me silently. "That is immediate family," I said quietly. "The people who stay when things are inconvenient." His face tightened with guilt for just a second before exhaustion washed over it again. "You are overthinking this, Mom," he muttered. Then he went upstairs. I listened to his footsteps disappear above me while the dishwasher hummed softly beside the sink. After a while, I turned off the kitchen lights and stood alone in the dark reflection of the window. For the first time since moving into that house, I allowed myself to admit something I had been too ashamed to say out loud. They were not simply taking me for granted anymore. They were slowly erasing me. 3 days after Ethan's birthday party, I stopped waking up before everyone else. It was a small thing, quiet enough that nobody noticed at first. For 8 months I had started every morning before sunrise. Coffee brewed by 6. Lunches packed by 6:30. Breakfast ready before the children came downstairs rubbing sleep from their eyes. That Wednesday, I stayed in bed until 7:15 listening to the pipes hum softly behind the basement walls. For the first time in months I let myself rest. Upstairs I heard cabinet doors slamming, footsteps rushing across hardwood floors. Brittany's sharp voice cutting through the morning silence. "Daniel, where are the kids' lunches?" she snapped. "I thought your mother already made them." I stared at the ceiling quietly while the chaos unfolded one floor above me. 10 minutes later, someone pounded down the basement stairs. Brittany appeared wearing expensive running clothes and irritation like a second layer of skin. "Evelyn," she said tightly, "the kids are late because breakfast is not ready." I sat up slowly and adjusted my glasses. "I was tired," I answered calmly. She blinked at me like she had never considered the possibility that I could feel exhaustion too. "Well," she replied after a pause, "we all get tired." Then she disappeared upstairs again. I waited another minute before getting dressed. By the time I entered the kitchen, Daniel was hurriedly stuffing granola bars into the children's backpacks while Brittany searched for Mia's soccer cleats. The kitchen looked like a storm had passed through it. Dirty dishes everywhere. Orange juice spilled across the counter. Pancake batter dripping onto the stove. Ethan looked close to tears because nobody had packed his dinosaur snack container correctly. I quietly poured myself coffee and sat at the kitchen island. Nobody offered me breakfast. Nobody asked how I was feeling. Brittany finally looked over at me while brushing hair from her face. "Can you at least drive them to school?" she asked. "Not please. Not good morning. Just another assignment handed over without thought." I took a slow sip of coffee before answering. "I have a doctor's appointment this morning." It was not entirely a lie. My knees had been hurting for weeks. Brittany stared at me in disbelief. "You could have mentioned that sooner," she muttered. Daniel avoided eye contact completely. That afternoon I did something else I had not done in months. I left the house alone. No grocery lists. No school pickup schedule. No errands for Brittany. I drove 20 minutes to a small diner Frank and I used to visit on Sundays after church. The waitress recognized me immediately. "Haven't seen you in a while, honey," she said warmly while refilling my coffee cup. I almost cried over that simple kindness. Almost. Instead, I ordered blueberry pancakes and sat beside the window watching people move through their ordinary lives outside. Nobody needed anything from me there. Nobody handed me chores disguised as gratitude. When I returned home later that evening, the house was tense. Brittany stood in the kitchen surrounded by unfolded laundry and dirty dishes. "The dryer stopped halfway through the cycle," she complained before I had even taken off my coat. "And Ethan forgot his homework because nobody checked his backpack." Nobody. Not Grandma. Not Evelyn. Just nobody. Daniel sat at the dining table rubbing his forehead while Mia quietly colored beside him. He looked exhausted. Older somehow. "This house has been a disaster all day," Brittany continued sharply. I looked around slowly. The overflowing trash can. The sink packed with dishes. The tension hanging in the air like smoke. Then I noticed something strange. For the first time since moving in, they finally saw how much work it took to keep their lives comfortable. And they were terrified of losing it. The next week felt different inside the house. Not louder exactly. More fragile. Like everyone suddenly realized the machine they depended on could stop working at any moment. I still helped with the children. I still cooked dinner most nights because Mia loved my chicken noodle soup, and Ethan refused to eat vegetables unless I hid them under melted cheese. But I stopped doing the invisible things. I stopped scrubbing bathroom mirrors before dawn. I stopped checking everyone's schedules taped to the refrigerator. I stopped folding Brittany's laundry into perfect department store stacks she never appreciated anyway. The reactions came quickly. "Has anyone seen my black sweater?" Brittany called one morning while tearing through the upstairs hallway closet. "It is probably still in the dryer," I answered calmly without looking up from my crossword puzzle. She stared at me in surprise. "You usually put everything away." "Usually. Another word that had quietly become permanent in that house. Daniel started noticing things too. One evening he opened the refrigerator and frowned. "We are out of bottled water," he asked absently. I looked over from the couch where I was reading beside Mia. "Then somebody should buy more," I said. The silence afterward felt almost physical. Brittany glanced at him sharply from the kitchen sink while Daniel looked genuinely confused, like he could not understand why the household was no longer functioning automatically around him. That Friday afternoon, I met Margaret for coffee at a small bakery 2 blocks away. She lived across the street and had watched families rise and collapse inside that neighborhood for over 30 years. Margaret was 74, silver-haired, elegant, and impossible to intimidate. "Honey," she said gently after listening to me quietly describe the last few months, "you know they built their lives around your sacrifice, right?" I stared down at my untouched tea. "They are overwhelmed," I answered automatically. Margaret leaned back in her chair slowly. "No," she replied. "Overwhelmed people say thank you. Entitled people say you missed a spot." I looked at her sharply because I had never told her those exact words. She gave me a sad little smile. "Brittany talks loudly when her windows are open." Something cold moved through my stomach. Margaret stirred cream into her coffee carefully before continuing. "A few weeks ago, she was outside telling someone that having you there saved them at least $3,000 a month in childcare." I stayed quiet. "Then she laughed," Margaret added softly. "Said older women are easier because they work for guilt instead of money." The bakery suddenly felt too warm, too crowded. I stared through the front window at cars sliding past in the afternoon rain while Frank's voice echoed faintly in my memory. "Never stay where you are only valued for what you provide." Margaret reached across the table and touched my hand gently. "Do you know whose money helped Daniel buy that house?" she asked. I blinked at her. "What do you mean?" "Honey," she said carefully, "did you not tell me years ago that you gave Daniel most of the down payment after Frank died?" I felt my chest tighten slightly. I had almost forgotten. After Frank passed, Daniel and Brittany had struggled financially. Rent kept increasing. Childcare costs were crushing them. So I sold Frank's vintage pickup truck and emptied a large portion of our retirement savings to help them buy that house. Daniel cried when I handed him the check. Brittany hugged me and called me an angel. I remember that now. Every detail. Margaret looked at me quietly across the table. "And now they keep you in the basement like hired help," she said softly. I did not answer her right away because suddenly something inside me had become painfully clear. I had not moved into their home because they loved me. I had moved into a house I already helped build, only to become invisible inside it. After my conversation with Margaret, I started seeing the house differently. Not as a home. Not even as family. It looked more like a carefully balanced arrangement built on one person giving too much while everyone else convinced themselves it was normal. I noticed how Brittany never carried groceries if I was nearby. How Daniel automatically left his coffee mug in the sink instead of rinsing it. How nobody asked where I had been whenever I left the house for a few hours, only whether I had finished whatever task they expected done before returning. Once you see disrespect clearly, it becomes impossible to unsee. The following Monday, Brittany handed me another list while I was pouring cereal for Ethan. Dry cleaning, grocery pickup, return packages at the mall, deep clean guest bathroom before Friday. I looked down at the paper quietly, then folded it in half and placed it beside my coffee cup. "I am not doing all of this," I said calmly. The kitchen went silent. Brittany blinked at me in confusion. "Excuse me," she asked. I said I am not doing all of this. My voice stayed soft, controlled. That seemed to unsettle her more than anger would have. Daniel lowered his phone slowly from across the table. "Mom," he began carefully, "Brittany is just trying to keep things organized." I turned toward him. "Then perhaps the two of you should organize your own household." Ethan looked back and forth between us nervously while Mia stared down at her cereal bowl in silence. Brittany crossed her arms tightly. "You live here for free," she said before she could stop herself. The words landed hard against the room. Even Daniel looked startled she had said them out loud. I nodded once slowly because suddenly everything made sense. The basement, the list, the way she introduced me to people. In her mind, I was not family contributing out of love. I was payment being extracted in exchange for space inside a house I had financially helped create. I see, I answered quietly. Then I stood up, rinsed my coffee cup, and walked downstairs before anyone could see the expression on my face. That afternoon, I drove to the storage facility where the last pieces of my old life still sat untouched inside metal shelves and cardboard boxes. The manager recognized me immediately. "Back again, Miss Parker?" he asked warmly. I smiled faintly. "Just looking for some paperwork." Inside one of the bins beneath photo albums and old Christmas decorations, I found the folder I had not opened in years. Bank statements. Wire transfers. A copy of the cashier's check I gave Daniel and Brittany for their down payment. $75,000. Nearly half of everything Frank and I spent decades saving. I sat inside my car afterward staring at the papers in my lap while rain tapped softly against the windshield. I remembered Daniel crying when I handed him that money at my kitchen table. "I do not know how we will ever repay you," he had whispered back then. I had touched his hand and told him family takes care of each other. Funny how differently those words age depending on who is sacrificing. That evening when I returned home, the house felt tense again. Brittany barely spoke during dinner. Daniel looked exhausted. The children sensed the distance between everyone and stayed unusually quiet. Halfway through the meal, Mia accidentally knocked over her milk. Brittany sighed sharply in irritation, but before she could speak, Mia whispered something so softly I almost missed it. Grandma would have cleaned it already. Nobody moved for a second. Then Daniel slowly looked at me across the table. Really looked at me. Not as background noise. Not as free labor. As a tired woman who had quietly carried their entire world on her back for months while disappearing piece by piece in the process. And for the first time, I think my son realized he had helped make that happen. 2 nights later, I woke up around midnight to the sound of voices upstairs. At first I thought one of the children had a nightmare, but then I heard Brittany laughing softly through the air vent above my bed. I could not make out every word clearly, only scattered pieces drifting down through the dark basement ceiling. "No, seriously," she said between laughs. "We could never afford a full-time nanny right now." A second voice answered faintly through speakerphone. Then Brittany spoke again. "Daniel feels guilty because she helped with the house years ago, but honestly, having her here saves us a fortune." I sat up slowly in bed without turning on the lamp. The basement felt colder at night. "Does she ever complain?" the other woman asked faintly through the vent. Brittany laughed again. "Please. She needs us more than we need her." The silence afterward pressed hard against my chest. I stared into the darkness beside the washing machine while those words repeated in my mind over and over. She needs us more than we need her. For months I had convinced myself I was still part of a family. Maybe not appreciated properly. Maybe overlooked. But still loved somewhere underneath all the exhaustion and entitlement. In that moment I finally understood the truth. Brittany did not see sacrifice. She saw leverage. The next morning I moved through the kitchen quietly while everyone prepared for school and work. Brittany complained about traffic. Daniel searched for his car keys. Ethan could not find one sneaker. Normal chaos. Normal noise. Nobody noticed that something inside me had gone completely still. Around noon, I drove back to the storage unit. This time I stayed longer. I opened boxes I had ignored for months. Photo albums. Frank's old fishing jackets. My winter dishes with the tiny blue flowers around the edges. Pieces of a life that once belonged entirely to me, before I handed so much of it away trying to keep everyone else comfortable. At the very back of the unit sat a small cedar chest Frank built 40 years ago. Inside were legal papers, insurance documents, and the original records from our retirement account. I sat cross-legged on the concrete floor carefully sorting through everything until I found the property transfer paperwork tied to the down payment I gave Daniel and Brittany. Attached was a handwritten note from Daniel himself. "Someday we will take care of you the way you always took care of us." I closed my eyes for a moment after reading it. Not because I was angry anymore. Strangely, the anger had already faded. What remained felt quieter than that. Clearer. Like finally waking up after denying reality for too long. That afternoon, I stopped by a senior living community Margaret had mentioned weeks earlier. It was not a nursing home. Just a peaceful neighborhood of small cottages for older adults. White fences. Rose bushes. Rocking chairs on front porches. One-bedroom homes with sunlight pouring through wide kitchen windows. The manager showed me a vacant cottage near the back garden. A lot of residents here are starting over after difficult family situations, she said gently while handing me a brochure. I stood inside the tiny kitchen imagining silence that belonged to me. No chore lists taped to refrigerators. No footsteps overhead. No feeling like I needed permission to exist inside my own life. For the first time in months, I breathed deeply without tension sitting behind my ribs. When I returned home that evening, Mia ran to hug me at the door. "Grandma, where were you?" she asked. I knelt down carefully and kissed the top of her head. "Just taking care of a few things, sweetheart." Brittany glanced up briefly from the couch. "Well, tomorrow Ethan has a dentist appointment at 3, and we need groceries before the weekend." I looked at her calmly for a long moment. Then I smiled softly. "You should probably start making other arrangements." The room went completely quiet. I moved out on a quiet Tuesday morning while everyone was gone. No arguments. No dramatic speeches. Just 4 cardboard boxes, 2 suitcases, Frank's cedar chest, and the last pieces of myself I still wanted to keep. The moving company arrived at 9 sharp. By 10:30, the basement was empty except for dust marks where my bed used to sit beside the washer and dryer. I paused at the bottom of the stairs before leaving for the last time. Strange how a place could hold so much loneliness even after it was empty. Upstairs, sunlight poured through the kitchen windows onto spotless countertops I would never wipe down again. The refrigerator still held Brittany's color-coded schedules and shopping lists. Pick up dry cleaning. Mia's soccer practice Thursday. Call exterminator. For months, my entire existence had been hidden inside those little scraps of paper. Invisible labor holding everyone together while nobody noticed until it stopped. I left one envelope on the kitchen island addressed simply to Daniel. Inside was a copy of the $75,000 cashier's check from years earlier along with a handwritten note he gave me after accepting the money. "Someday we will take care of you the way you always took care of us." Beneath it, I wrote only one sentence. Family should never feel like employment. Then I walked out the front door quietly and never looked back. The cottage felt peaceful from the moment I stepped inside. Small living room. Soft cream-colored walls. Fresh flowers sitting beside the kitchen sink, left by the property manager as a welcome gift. Through the window, I could see older couples walking slowly beneath maple trees while wind chimes moved gently on nearby porches. Nobody needed anything from me there. Nobody expected me to earn the right to exist. That first evening, I ate tomato soup and grilled cheese at my own tiny kitchen table, while jazz music played softly from a radio near the window. I had not realized how tense my body had become until the tension finally disappeared. Around 7:30 my phone started ringing. "Daniel." I let it go to voicemail. Then Brittany called. Then Daniel again. By bedtime there were 12 missed calls and 4 messages. His final voicemail sounded different from the others. Quieter. "Mom," he said heavily. "The house feels wrong without you here." I sat on the edge of my new bed listening to those words in silence. Wrong. Not empty. Not painful. Wrong. Like something essential had suddenly vanished and left everyone scrambling to understand how much they depended on it. Over the next few weeks, I heard pieces of their life through occasional phone calls and conversations with Margaret. Brittany had to reduce her work hours because childcare costs were overwhelming. Daniel started missing meetings after forgetting school pickups twice in 1 week. The house stayed messy, tense, exhausting. Funny how quickly people notice invisible work once they are forced to carry it themselves. But the part that stayed with me most was Mia's letter. It arrived 3 weeks after I moved out inside a crookedly addressed envelope covered with little flower stickers. "Grandma, I miss your pancakes and movie nights. The house is loud now. Mom gets angry a lot. I liked it better when you lived with us." I folded the letter carefully and placed it inside Frank's cedar chest beside old photographs and retirement papers. Some things deserve protection. A month later, Daniel finally came to visit alone. He stood awkwardly on my little front porch holding grocery store flowers and looking older than I had ever seen him. "I did not realize how much you were carrying," he admitted quietly after a long silence. I looked past him toward the garden where afternoon sunlight touched the rose bushes beside my walkway. "That was the problem," I answered softly. You should have realized. He cried a little then. Not loudly. Just enough for me to see the little boy he used to be underneath the tired man he had become. I forgave him in that moment. But forgiveness and access are not the same thing. After he left, I sat alone on my porch with a cup of tea warming my hands while evening settled softly across the neighborhood. For the first time in a very long time, the silence around me did not feel lonely. Felt like peace.